Mr Corbyn may not have been at PMQs, but he did controversially attend the annual fundraising dinner of the Stop the War coalition on Friday night. Some Labour MPs accused the pressure group of being anti-West and seeking to blame the Paris terrorist attacks on Western intervention in the Middle East. They urged Mr Corbyn to pull out of the dinner at a Turkish restaurant. Is their outrage justified? We asked John Rees of the Stop the War coalition to answer the criticism. But I started by asking the Labour MP Emma Reynolds what all the fuss was about.
I have called on my party leader to distance himself from Stop the War. I believe that there are many people in Parliament and across the country who sincerely hold pacifist views, but I'm afraid that in recent weeks and months we've seen that Stop the War could be more accurately described as anti-West rather than anti-war. In the immediate aftermath of the Paris attacks, when 130 people were brutally murdered by Daesh terrorists, Stop the War published an article suggesting that Paris was reaping the whirlwind of Western intervention. They've also more recently compared the so-called international solidarity of jihadis to the many men and women who travelled to Spain during the 1930s, during their civil war, to fight fascism. I just think that these are unacceptable views, and I hope that my party leader will distance himself from them.
Well, Jeremy Corbyn's spokesman said that the Labour leader, I quote, would not accept attempts to portray campaigning, lobbying and protests as somehow beyond the pale. He's got a point, hasn't he?
I'm very happy for people to campaign and to lobby me. They do that all of the time. What I'm not happy about is an organisation that seems more anti-West than anti-war, even though it's parading itself as anti-war. And I choose another example. Russia. Where was the condemnation of Russia in September for bombing moderate Syrian rebel forces in Syria? Why does this organisation seek to justify Russia's invasion of both Georgia many years ago and more recently of the Ukraine by Russia? Why are they not condemned for an illegal invasion?
OK, John Rees, I mean, the basic point there is that Stop the War coalition is not good company for the Labour leader to be keeping. And in particular, what do you make of the allegation that your organisation is in some way anti-West rather than anti-war?
Well, if that were true, we wouldn't have issued an official statement condemning the Russian bombing in Syria. Now, I don't know whether you read that. You should have read it, though, without making that kind of accusation on air and not realising that we've done that.
Were there demonstrations outside the Russian embassy?
And the reason for that is because we support the anti-war movement in Russia, which is carrying out demonstrations against its government. But our primary responsibility, because we are citizens of this country, is to lobby our government over its actions. Now, you see, every government, this government, the British government, the Russian government, the Turkish government, every government deplores somebody else's imperialism. They would like much less imperialism from every other state except their own. So we're here to make sure that blind spot doesn't occur in British politics. Now, you've quoted two articles that were on our site that were hosted from other blogs. If you want to know what the positions of Stop the War are, I refer you to its official, democratically decided statements, and those have been completely opposed to Russian intervention. They've been completely opposed to the terror attacks in Paris. But we are not going to avoid an argument here that Western foreign policy has been one of the things that has contributed in a significant way to the growth of the Islamic State and to the growth of support for terrorist ideas in Western society. And our case is that bombing doesn't destroy terrorism, it recruits for terrorism and it recruits terrorists. Now, these are serious political points which should be part of the political debate in this country, and the attempt by you and others to rubbish the Stop the War coalition is simply an attempt to shut down debate and to discredit Jeremy Corbyn.
There is a suggestion, though, isn't there? You seem to be more critical of some wars than others. And, for example, the Russian invasion of Crimea and Ukraine, you didn't, as I understand it, you said that was partly a response to NATO expansionism.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, as we know, at the fall of the Berlin Wall, and you might want to be a little bit careful when you're discussing with me about anti-Russian activity, because I was on the demonstrations for 3 days that brought down the Berlin Wall. At the time, Mikhail Gorbachev was told, and we've had this confirmed from both sides, that the Americans said that they would not expand NATO eastwards. Since then, there's been nothing but NATO expansion eastwards into the heartlands of territory which are close to and are bound to cause concern to the Russian state.
But does that excuse Russia invading
no,
sovereign
it
states?
No, it doesn't. But it does provide context which isn't provided, usually in the debate in this country. It does point to what has been the expansionist military alliance during the period since the fall of the Berlin Wall. These things should be seriously taken into consideration in any serious debate.
OK. Now, Reynolds, Labour MPs at Westminster may not like some of what Stop the War Coalition stands for, but nevertheless, this is raw politics. It gets people engaged in the political process. What's wrong with that?
Well, I welcome democratic debate, but I also think that it's simply unbelievable that an organisation that has been set up for as long as Stop the War doesn't have any kind of editorial content on its website. And Matt Carr, who wrote the piece comparing jihadism to the international brigades that came together in solidarity against fascism in 1930s Spain, has also been a spokesman for Stop the War and has sat on different platforms representing the organisation. But one thing that I do think that we should avoid doing is to somehow think that there's a binary choice between war and peace. There has been a war going on for Syria for many years. I voted for military airstrikes to be part of a broader strategy to bring an end to the war in Syria.
John, some Labour MPs have claimed that in the wake of that vote they were subject to intimidation or bullying. Would you condone, for example, the posting of pictures of dead babies through the letterboxes of MPs who supported the military operation in Syria?
No, of course not. The story should be here that of a huge lobbying operation, part of an entirely legitimate democratic process, an absolutely tiny minority were abusive. And they were abusive on both sides, by the way. If you want to look at the Twitter stream of the officers of the Stop the War Coalition, you'll also see people being threatened and you'll also see abuse. So I condemn it from whatever quarter it comes from. But it was a tiny minority of the lobbying operation that went on around this, and none of it was to do with the Stop the War Coalition.
Emma Reynolds, do you accept that, or do you think that Stop the War Coalition and even your party leader have in some way contributed to an atmosphere where this sort of thing was going on?
Well, firstly, Stop the War criticised my party leader for doing the right thing and giving Labour MPs a free vote. This was a very, very difficult decision that we had to take, and I believe that Jeremy Corbyn was right to say that this was an issue of conscience and give us a free vote. I'm sorry that Stop the War criticised Jeremy Corbyn in that way. I do think that the atmosphere outside of Parliament on the day of the vote was slightly difficult, to be frank. You know, I do think that we need to have a very respectful debate and one that doesn't involve bullying and intimidation.
So there was no bullying and intimidation. You just didn't like some of the language that was used. And to be honest, I didn't like some of the language that was used by the proponents of war either. But nothing that we've done as an organisation.
We're not proponents of war.
Well, you are. You are
that's
people.
Where with respect, I disagree.
Well,
we argue that there is a different cause.
You voted to send bombers from this country
because
and
I think
deliver
that can bring an end
bombs
to the war sooner rather than later.
Well, you can move towards this kind of Orwellian position that peace is war and war is peace, and these two things aren't very distinct. But I can tell you what, when you're on the wrong end of a paveway bomb, as many Syrians speaking to The Guardian only a week ago have told you, this is not what they want to happen. Because there will be innocents killed. There already have been school children killed by the French bombing. We know what happened recently in Afghanistan with the destruction of the Médecins Sans Frontières hospital by an American attack. This is going to happen in Syria as well.
Well, I, again, disagree with this categorisation of members of Parliament as either pro or anti-war. This isn't about any of us being pro-war. This is about a broader plan to try and bring peace to the Middle East and to stop the ongoing war.
Emma Reynolds and John Rees on those deep divisions on the left.